Hello, I'm ABX2Cat, and welcome back to the second channel video. It's kind of late here, so sorry if it's like dark or like some stuff moves or it's dirty. But anyway, today I want to talk about something very unrelated to that because I wanted to talk about bad news slash opinionated news slash fake news, clickbait, all these terms for like, I guess bad journalism you could call it, because it's something I wanted to make a video on like, as recently as like 9 months ago, and then I just kind of decided not to for whatever reason, because it's, even like February of last year, I saw a newspaper on the table of some train one day, and I was just like, why do people still, read newspapers and websites that are so clearly, slanted this way or that way on the political spectrum? Why would you read news which is just, trying to hide certain facts and really, make other ones more prominent? But it's one of those things that I guess is the real big driver behind what now has become known as fake news that, was really big for the election last year. And that even today, a lot of people still, even though they know fake news is a thing, will still trust some of their sources from fake news because it reaffirms what they believe. And it's one of those really confusing things that I figured, why not talk a little bit about, maybe this is going to be an incoherent mess, but maybe learn something about fake news and clickbait and all those other terms, and hopefully you all do enjoy it. So with that said, let's get straight into it, and let's start by talking about, I guess, the origin of all of this. I think the cool part of any story is like how it all began, and, clickbait and fake news and all this sort of stuff has actually been around for quite some time. It was called yellow journalism. That's the first real term you can find for it, back in like the 19th century, because what would happen is, back when newspapers were sold by having like a small child yell out the headline, not always a small child, but it's nice to picture like, a small child going, extra, extra, read all about it, mayor had a big scandal, or something like that. So, that's how you had to like sell papers, which meant that what would sell best was not the best newspaper journalism or the best story, although those would have like big increases in, I guess, retention, but the biggest like selling copies would always be the one with the catchiest headline, which meant it always came down to having a really good headline before everything else, which is, I guess, the advent of clickbait and fake news and stuff, because the headline is what makes people buy, like a 60p newspaper, the headline is what makes people click a website, and that's how you make a profitable news business, because realistically, the news is a business like any other one. You might not think of it that way. You might think, oh yeah, the news or, goal as an organization is to, make the best news, but very, very few news organizations are that way. Most news organizations are actually businesses. So their goal is, if they're a website, to get the most clicks slash audience retention humanly possible. If they have a subscription, to make you buy as many, I guess, months as humanly possible. And that means that basically, or if they're a paper, you have to like sell copies. But yeah, their goal is to make you buy their stuff. Their goal isn't to make good stuff. That's just a byproduct of getting you there. That's something you need to realize of all of these things. Although, sometimes there's often people that want to make good stuff in there. That's not the business's thing that keeps it going. But businesses that have the best journalistic practices but can't, get enough people to buy it, they go out of business, because that's how business works. That's a key part of everything I'm about to say going forward. So yeah, why does opinionated news exist in the first place? Like, why can't all news just be the facts? I'm sure everyone's thought this at some point in their life, and I'm sure it's easy enough to explain that, oh yeah, well, if you take a story like UK economy contracted by 0.3% this quarter or something, that's been a while since something like that happened, but if you take that story, the only facts you can really get from that before you get anywhere opinionated is just saying that number by itself. But even then, even just the core one single fact, because everything beyond that is opinion, even that one core single fact, how prominent you make that is kind of like a bias as to whether you think that, if you put that really high up, that's like a dig against the government. You put it really low down, it's kind of hiding the government's bad. So even then, you've got some amount of political bias. But then think about what that story is going to have to contain. You're going to have to take, statements from people, or like people's opinions on something. So if like, opposition leader says something, then you got to take all these things into account. And the way you put a story together can really, really easily lead to some biases. Like, if all you take is anti-government stuff, then, now it's like, look how bad the government is. If all you take is like, well, it's for this reason, and really it's all okay, then you can make it be a really pro-government piece. So just to take two-party system, for instance, easy stuff right there, right? So that means that to make non-biased news, you actually have to go out of your way. And the problem with this is, and the reason that biased news actually exists, is because most people, although everyone likes to believe that they want to know just the facts and only that, most people actually want not just this seems so weird to say out loud, but most people actually kind of want to have something that reaffirms their belief. And I can spot myself doing this sometimes. I'm reading a website, like, it's really hard to get behind something that just destroys your worldview. But if you're just reading a story one day and it's like, oh yeah, this thing you already believe in, here's a piece of news that proves it even more. And that means when you read that piece of article that says, oh yeah, guess what, government is bad and drugs are good, or making up some points here, but if you read that, you're like, yeah, exactly. And that is why, for the most part, if you are that leaning, you're going to find stuff that appeals to you that way, because you find the stuff and it's like, wow, these people agree with me, and that's why if you're that leaning, you go that way. But why is it that these places exist that way and that way in the first place? Well, for the most part, I think it exists because there's the market demand of like, once an organization starts, unless they're strictly meant to be somewhere in the center, so for instance, I think there's a couple of papers in the UK that try, but they're not really well known for it. But there's also the BBC, for instance. Even then, you've got to have really strict guidelines on how that goes down. And even then, every now and then, it gets accused of going one way or the other, because that's how kind of people perceive facts at some level. And the point I'm trying to raise as to why news goes left and right in the first place, because it's a key part of where we're about to go, the fake news thing, is because you're going to drift that way eventually anyway, and trying to convince your audience. So if you drift to the right accidentally, because that's how your facts go or whatever, your perception of the facts, your editors, then what's going to happen is if your editors try to go back that way, the people who read it are going to be upset, and it's going to cause a loss of sales. So it's a bad business move that upsets your customers, and at some point it becomes a thing where you're not necessarily, the people in those organizations aren't necessarily trying to make bad news, wrong news or anything, but they're trying to present it in a way which they know their readers will love. And this is something you can see on YouTube, actually. Like, on the most simple level of, like, I make, news about, a particular game. My best interest, this is something I'm always, like, trying to mentally check in my head. My best interest is to say, this is so exciting, this is the, not this is so exciting, but, like, this is the biggest thing ever, this is so much better or bigger than everything else, because when I say that, that is going to be better for the video, that gets more clicks, and that makes the whole business thing goes around. And that's true for any single, game community. Think about, like, you might notice this a lot, actually. There are certain channels that succeed more because they make everything so exciting, because that's the sort of stuff that people want to hear, that makes them excited, that makes them share the video, etc. And that's something, on just a video game level, but then think about that in a massive scale journalistic sense, and that is why biased news exists, because people kind of want the bias. Having the bias in there is something that once it's in there, it's hard to get out, and also because, generally speaking, people are more passionate when it's really far one way or the other, which can then lead it that way. So that's also why, by the way, you'll find that most okay, so again, take like a Call of Duty, for instance. Most people are either really pro, for the developers, or really against everything, because they're the two polarizing sides. There aren't too many people in the middle. There's a great CGP Ray video on this called Fort Germs. Would recommend checking it out sometime. But yeah, basically, people love to hate the other side of something. Like, again, that's how people kind of naturally, tendency. There's like in-group, out-group, there's the good people, and there's the bad people. That's how everyone does it, by the way. The left-right thing, it doesn't matter. I'm trying to prove that whichever one you are, you probably demonize the other side, common thing. Anyways, that's why opinionated news exists, and that, I know, like, for a lot of people that's so obvious, but to me that was like, oh, it exists because people want it to exist. People know somewhere in their head, or they just, they don't realize, but they're doing it mentally, and that is why that exists. So how does fake news exist from that then, and why is fake news taken so long to propagate? Why is it that 2016 was the year as opposed to any other year? And I think 2016, having the big election where people are already so amped up, you've got to bear in mind that, like, for the longest time, the reason that you don't get fake news from newspapers is because they kind of have that reputation to uphold, it's really two reasons, I'd say. It's the reputation thing, so even if a place that's known for bad news, like, I really hate to name anywhere, because you might be like, I love them. So let's just say the Huffington Post or the Daily Mail, like two very far out there places, right? If they put out a story that's awful, it impacts them in a big way, because their readers think they're real. They don't want to put out anything that's fake, because their readers are not going to like that. However, the thing that makes fake news so possible all of a sudden is because they don't use real, they're not using an established brand, sometimes with like clickbait stuff, but even then that's not quite so far to fake news as we're going down this train off. But the reason that fake news as it existed in this election cycle is so big is because they don't have a brand to maintain. They're just called like 13 News Bulgaria EU or whatever. I think actually, by the way, fun fact, most of these places came from either Russia, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, which I have to call that, or some people will be offended because this is a geography channel. It came from lots of like Eastern European countries like that, which I found fascinating. There's like a Macedonian village which just exploded with wealth because there was like so many people in there doing this. But yeah, these people make websites. They make that website with so many just random stories. It has to have no truth to it, no vetting, and it's so easy to write stuff like that, and it's especially easy to write stuff that's inflammatory. So think right now as to something that would make you interested to click something. That's all they need to get from you, the click and therefore the ad view. All they need to get from you is like, and then even better if you can share it. So, for instance, there's the election map of 2016. That's like they took a crime map and they turned it into one. All they really did is took an election map and said, "Oh, look, here's the same thing again. It's a crime one." You can see all these certain things where like, oh yeah. All you have to do is like make up some ludicrous story that could be real. No one's going to fact check it because most people don't fact check news because they trust that there is a trust in the news implicitly, and then that kind of leads to just people believing these wild things, and that's why so many people believe this stuff because you don't. going with that earlier thing, you want to believe the stuff you already believe in. If you believe that candidate A is amazing, candidate B sucks, which everyone did apparently for some bizarre reason, but yeah, everyone believed their candidate was great and the other one sucked, then, oh, look at this, we've got proof, he said that, she said, whoa, I'm going to share this on the Facebook, and that's, in short, that's the biggest reason why it happens. So, yeah, fake news is really easy to propagate because they have no reputation or brand. It's entirely just based on shares and getting it out there. I think they also use some tactical Facebook marketing, and when you have that on top of, the fact that people already kind of want to see this opinionated news, fake news becomes a really big thing that's almost impossible to stop, because the only way you can stop it is with fact-check websites, which, for the record, fact-checking is out there. This is the thing that makes this so bad. You might be like, but why don't we just have a good fact-check service? There are so many fact-check websites out there, but there's two problems. First of all, most of the fact-check websites have an agenda. I think it's PolitiFact, which is, like, horrendously known for going one way or the other, and I think Snopes now has a kind of good fact checker, but there's even when you put a fact checker out there, that fact checker can then just apply to the same bias of left and right, and you really just run into this issue of, like, how do you find out anything? And the simple answer is not the news. I think the news, if you really think about it, is never a good place to find anything like that, because the news, their interest is in interesting you, and when it comes to politics, the way human brains work is not really suited to news. So yeah, if you're watching this video right now and you're like, I maybe didn't learn a thing, but what should I do about that? I guess my only pro tip would be find a source of news, but at least know where it's coming from. Again, I personally like the BBC because, like, they get so many complaints from both sides. I think you can, like, again, if you really dig into it, you can find a pro-state bias, because obviously their interest is in that sort of stuff. But, like, again, even then, that's like taking an interest and trying to strip away from that. But the point I'm actually trying to raise in the video is fake news is crazy, but just what is the solution to the problem? Shrug. I just think, like, the big thing I find is that you've got to think of it this way. News isn't this reliable source that it maybe once was somewhere in the 70s, because news had this really big news became a really cool, like, we're gonna be the good guys after, I think it was Watergate was the big one that made journalists the good guy. But news as it is today, there are some places that are probably still reliable and want to fact check everything they say, but even then, they're gonna feed it to you with an agenda. Even then, they're going to try and make it the best way to sell possible, and even then, you have no idea if, unless you verify it independently, which then runs into the same problems, what can you do about that? And, again, I don't know what the true solution to this is. I would say just, like, find a somewhat reputable place and, like, try and at least, like, dig into the other side. But I think the real problem is people and the fact that news is entertainment, not the thing itself. This is just, like, a natural consequence of free market plus people. And I don't know, this isn't how I wanted to end. I thought there'd be a really uplifting message, but something, fake news is bad. Hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of this. I'll remove it if you hate it, and I'll see you all some other time. Goodbye. F9.